I was just talking with someone this morning that brought up the idea that there is a time to mourn. But what did Jesus' Beatitude say? Blessed, mature, ready are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So thank you for that music that comforts. Hopefully we'll have some words that comfort. Today, I'm concluding a 3-week talk that I entitled Confident Living. Confident Living. It's certainly a well-known hymn in unity, but more importantly, it's a well-known thought in unity to have a sense of confident living. Or another word that we might use for it is faith. There are times where we are called to stand in our faith. And Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, certainly did not limit that word faith to certain articles of religious belief. For him, he defined faith as the perceiving power of mind. That is, an intuition of what is true and good and worthy of our effort, of our work, of our lives. He believed, as I do, we all have faith. And though we're sometimes tempted to say, oh Lord, give me more faith, in our unity teachings, Mr. Fillmore believed, we have all the faith we ever have. It's not a question of getting more faith from source or from our God. It's a question for us. Where am I directing my faith? Today, my third lesson in this series is inspired by the work of Rudolf Steiner, and so I entitled the lesson, Confident Living. I have a vision, and I live it. That could have been, I have a faith, and I stand in true alignment with it. I stand in what my core belief about myself, about humanity, about the world is. And I stay true to that. I live it day by day in the choices I make, the actions I take, how I relate to others. So I wanted to expand the idea today of the value of our faith. Sometimes I like to remind you your attention, which is a form of faith. What do you attend to? What do you watch? Your attention is your greatest gift. It's how you find guidance. It's how you connect with others. You attend, you listen, you pay attention to others. And in the diversity of our world, and at this time, we're really called to stand in our faith. Are we going to hear another's story? Are we going to really see them? Or are we just going to ignore a lot of people that we may not hold the same beliefs about life, society, politics? So I consider this confident living a spiritual tool, a foundation in each of our lives that we might describe as a strength of mind and heart that allows us to act with confidence, boldly, true to our beliefs. In our first lesson, we began recognizing Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And a lecture I once heard described people such as Dr. King as a moral witness. In other words, they didn't tell us what to do. They told us what to consider in life. He constantly reminded those that would hear him that we do not walk in this life alone. We do not walk alone. He focused, of course, on his Christian teachings, especially the Gospels that teach us of Jesus. He considered the golden rule, of course, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And also the greatest commandment, to love your God with all you've got, and to love your neighbor as yourself. That's not to love your neighbor equally to how you love yourself. It's to love your neighbor as yourself, as a part of your life. For in spiritual teachings, it is often said, we behold the Christ in one another, the spiritual truth in one another. To love our neighbors, therefore, is to see the same truth in them as we see in ourselves. The next week, we considered our co-founder of Unity. Actually, both founders of Unity, Charles and Rudolf Fillmore. Charles believed in the spiritual practice of the silence. He began his own personal study. He got it because he watched his wife. She led the way. She was so transformed and so even physically healed that he said, what is this all about? He was a businessman, and when he saw something that worked, he wanted to know why and how. And so he made the commitment, as he said, in all this talk of religion, all kinds of ideas, he said, I will go to headquarters. If this God they all talk about is spirit, and I'm a living spirit, then somehow we can communicate, or the whole religion thing is a fraud. He was very practical. And so he said, I'm going to see how this works, and I am going to allow a good amount of time each day for being in the silence, being open and receptive. It's like that old story of a little girl. She and her parents were walking in a park, and they walked by an old little chapel structure. And she said, I want to go in and pray. And they said, okay, honey, you go on in. And they kept looking at their watches. It was taking so long. And she came out and they asked her, well, we thought you were just going to go in and say a prayer. Why did it take so long? And she said, I wanted to sit quietly for a while and see if God wanted to say something. She really understood. Out of the mouths of babes comes wisdom. So Charles believed in this process, and he dedicated himself to daily times of silence, like that little girl, to see if God wanted to reveal something to him, inspire him, encourage him, empower him. And that was really the essence that developed our whole worldwide unity movement. Oh yes, the Fillmores took these ideas and used publishing to spread them around. If they were doing it now, I'm sure they'd be using social media. Whatever it was to get a good idea out into the world. But the essence of it was to practice silence or practice the presence. And with that phrase, I have to mention that a new Wednesday night class led by Kelly von Heidenkampf, Practicing the Presence, will begin as a class for your experience of the Lenten season that's not far away, that will take you from February into March. Charles Fillmore wrote, All manifestation of life, he wrote grandly, all manifestation of life originates in the silence. The thoughts that rise up in you and come to the surface in deed and actions, are they not from the silence? Do you take a step or lift a hand that has not its motive from the depths of the mighty sea of life within your own being? Then why look to the external world for that which comes only from the silence within? So Charles would teach what we call unity students, those that follow a path of unity teachings. He and Myrtle always said, this is not some kind of revelation. We don't claim unity to be the one true church. These are simply eternal, ancient ideas of God's presence and power, and this is how we're working with them in our lives. And others have gathered around us, larger and larger crowds, wanting to work with the Fillmores on these ideas. So today we move into the work of Dr. Rudolf Steiner. Why do I even bring that up? Well, for a couple of reasons. You do benefit or have to put up with my own spiritual path of many years. And when I was 14, I had a teacher in school. And one day she said, "Are you free on Sunday?" Well, I could be. She said, "I want to take you to a Sunday service at a place called Unity." And so she took me to Unity Village. Many of you know our world headquarters outside of Kansas City. She took me there for a service. It was quite eye-opening from the kind of Sunday service I had grown up with. Afterwards, we went to their famous vegetarian cafe and had a meal there, and then to their bookstore. And she bought me a book, Emmett Fox's The Sermon on the Mount. He would lead a great ministry of vast numbers in New York City, filling first the Hippodrome and later Carnegie Hall with thousands of people every Sunday in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And in addition to that, she said, I think you should read the writings of Rudolf Steiner. So that one teacher, we all have those amazing teachers in life that encourage us or put us on a track of self-discovery. And for me, it was this teacher, Kay Leonard was her name. And she set me on this dual path. Unity became a spiritual community, a beloved community in whatever city I happened to live with at the time. And Rudolf Steiner became a spiritual practice and study. I didn't realize it until it's printed in your bulletin this morning, but thanking our Rudolf Steiner study group here at Unity, they just completed, after 8 years of study together, his 5 basic books. Quite an accomplishment. It was an accomplishment they helped me experience, in that I've led groups like this for 20 years. I didn't realize it until I looked at the calendar. But this was the first group that was focused and devoted enough that we were able to get through the 5 major books of Steiner. Rudolf Steiner was a contemporary of Charles Fillmore. He created his life work and named it anthroposophy. That's a word not all people are comfortable saying, anthroposophy. So the simpler name for it is spiritual science. He was a great teacher throughout Europe and gave over 5,000 lectures throughout Europe in his time. He began what is known as Waldorf schools or Waldorf education all over the world. We have two beautiful schools here, one in St. Paul, one in the city of Minneapolis. He developed biodynamic agriculture, an early form, one of the earliest forms of organic farming. He created initiatives or works in music, art, I've mentioned education. But all of this came out of the central idea of his study. And did he study? His collected works are considered the largest volume of work of any known human being. It requires over 600 volumes to contain all that he left to his students and to the movement. Steiner's worldview reminds us of the pledge of Jesus, really seen in the Lord's Prayer that we sing most every Sunday. Not my will, but thy will be done. To realize what is a higher will. We heard it at Christmas also in Mary's declaration, the telling of her annunciation of the birth of the Jesus child. And the scripture accounts her words as, "Let it be done with me according to your will." So these are spiritual principles of what we call in unity co-creation. Co-creation. Unity has always taught, as did Dr. Steiner, that our whole reason for being on this physical earth and being granted physical life is that we might work together and among one another in expressing the goodness and power of our Creator in this world. Rudolf Steiner would make bold statements that sometimes would even shock those of us in unity to this day. For Charles looked within to find the Christ indwelling. You leave the sanctuary under stained glass that says, "We behold the Christ in you." But Rudolf Steiner would remind his students, you will not find the Christ in isolation within yourself. You will find the Christ in your connection with others, in community. So he had a tremendous emphasis upon the creative power and individual discovery in how we worked together and how we worked as a beloved community and by extension as a global humanity. His term, spiritual science, which Charles Fillmore also used, but Steiner had a very clear way of defining spiritual science. He said, whereas natural science, which he had a great respect for, he had his doctorate in the sciences, he said natural sciences look to technology or equipment to look at the reality of the worlds. Well, something as simple as microscopes or telescopes, and nowadays far more complex technology to see and investigate the world. For Steiner, the spiritual path that he called spiritual science was making the human being, making yourself, an instrument of observation, of the activity of spirit, the creative work of God in the world. You make yourself the spirit of observation. And that's why it's called, or they use the term, spiritual science. He would also try to give images to his students of how what Eric Butterworth called in Unity, the eachness is in the allness. Steiner would use the metaphor, we are each drops in the infinite ocean that is God. We have all the essence of divine life, but we are not individually the entire ocean that is God. We have the quality of God expressed as our individuality. This was a metaphor used by Charles Fillmore in Unity. Later, as I mentioned, Eric Butterworth, our great minister in New York City. Rudolf Steiner also gave many lessons, many spiritual practices, many ways for his students to try to do this work, both within and as community, that led to what he called the ennoblement of humanity, the further development of humanity. And one I'm only going to mention today were his requirements for spiritual training. On the counter outside the sanctuary doors, this is printed out, so if you're a note taker, you don't need to try to rush to write this down on your program. You can pick up a handout as you leave the sanctuary. He said these are required for the spiritual path. The first requirement is that we turn our attention to the improvement of our physical and mental and spiritual health. The second requirement is that we feel ourselves to be part of the whole of life, what he called a unity of life, of which we were a part. The third requirement is that we win through to the conviction, we develop the faith that thoughts and feelings are as important for the world as actions. This is really essential. Sometimes we've been taught that my thoughts are private. They're all within me, and if I don't tell anybody about them, no one's going to know. But to realize the power of thought and feeling. You know, when you're in a room with someone that has really hard feelings, really negative thoughts about you, they don't have to tell you. You feel it. You're aware of it. And so he felt it was a time now that human beings needed to recognize the power of thought, feeling was as powerful as the actions that we take. The fourth requirement is that we acquire the conviction that true nature does not lie without, but within. We can achieve nothing on the spiritual path if we regard ourselves merely as a product or a result of the physical world. We have a creative truth that is the essence of who we are. The fifth requirement, this does not sound like fun, is steadfastness or commitment to following through on a resolution once it has been made. Nothing should stop us to follow through on our decisions except, I like this, except that further insight or contemplation reveals that we need to change our goal or our path. So we should stick with it unless we realize we need to make an adjustment. The sixth requirement is that we develop the feeling of gratitude for all that we receive, for everything that we receive. And this, of course, is an essential in our unity teachings. To be grateful, appreciate, praise all the good in our life. As we say in unity, to look for the good, or that is, to look for God at work in our life, our community, our world. And the seventh and last requirement is that we always understand life as these conditions demand, so that we have the possibility of giving our life the stamp of unity, the stamp of wholeness, of integrity. Rudolf Steiner wrote in 1894 his first major book, The Philosophy of Freedom, and he speaks, "Man makes himself free from what is generic. For the generic features of the human race, when rightly understood, do not restrict an individual's freedom. A human being develops qualities and activities of his own, and the basics for these we can only seek in the person himself." We have to understand the individual, not his gender, not his race, not his life story, not his religion. And what was interesting about this, he was writing in 1894, and he said, we need to pay particular attention to this in how women are treated in our culture. For they are often expected to follow the generic, that is, to be the way a woman's supposed to be. He said, no, they should be encouraged to develop their individual life and truth and direction and purpose in their life. It was rather controversial for 1894. Finally, Steiner told his students an essential part of the spiritual path is every individual must take a genuine interest in each human being that they encounter. To take a genuine interest in each human being they encounter in life. So the spiritual path for Steiner was not something isolated to his individual life. It's all about me. It was a spiritual path that helped lead us to loving our neighbors as ourselves. So in summary, over these 3 Sundays, we've considered, I've presented, I hope you have found some value in the life work of these extraordinary individuals of the 20th century. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Charles Fillmore, Dr. Rudolf Steiner in Europe. We've touched upon their expansive worldviews and saw a reflection of the gospel or the teachings of Jesus in their development. King, who dreamed of a world made complete and healthy and free through a society in alignment with its truth as a people, as a nation. Charles Fillmore attempted to live in steadfast connection with the Spirit within and encouraged everyone to demonstrate the unity of spirit that held all of humanity together, recognizing there is one Spirit expressing through us all. And the perspective of Rudolf Steiner, who through his spiritual vision beheld the network of all aspects of creation, beholding Spirit at work within each and all, and throughout nature, and throughout the universe. So at this time, I invite us to turn within and let this essential work that I discovered, at least for myself, when I lived in Switzerland and studied the work of Steiner, that he was working with an essential prayer, that he called it, that Charles Fillmore also used in the Unity movement. And I have always sought to see who was the author of this prayer that both Dr. Steiner and Charles Fillmore would use the same prayer throughout their work in the 20th century. So I just call that prayer to our minds, and let's hold the thought together, working within each of us. I speak it in the first person, not that I'm speaking about James, but I'm speaking about the true I or spirit in us all. So please hold these words with me. This is the version Dr. Steiner used in German, of course translated into English. So close your eyes if you like. Just allow your attention to move from any outer activity in this building, in our community, and go to your very heart, your essence. I am now surrounded by the pure being of God, and I am steeped in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. I acknowledge your being and your power, O Spirit who blesses all. Blot out now, in your divine wisdom, my mortal errors, and bring into being my world through the power of love, according to your perfect law. And I invite you to now allow your attention to gradually return to this beautiful room in which we are seated among friends. And allow your attention to fully come back. And know that inwardly you have been changed. And this prayer can guide you also in your relationships, in our beloved community, through our world. It is a step of preparation so that loving our neighbors as ourselves becomes a true reality, a true expression in how we are in this world. And so it is.